Yes, I'm just gonna briefly talk you through my script because I already told you that in our museum we're trying to use this, or again I am trying to use it in order to verbalize things that are kind of happening but we don't quite understand yet. And I was just increasingly irritated, in our meetings and in our work in general, that there is this unspoken expectation that we have to be enthusiastic about our work. And I thought enthusiasm is not a good strategy for anything, actually. Enthusiasm only leads to disappointment, in fact. And it's a very temporary thing and a very temporal thing, and it cannot last. And in fact, there's also always a question of power involved in enthusiasm, because it's the subjectivity of the strongest person that decides the topic about which everyone else needs to be enthusiastic or not. So it's a question of what's happening within an organization, within a confederation as such as ours, who has the power to formulate the exhortation to his colleagues, it's usually a man, to be enthusiastic. So basically it all started with my private revolt against enthusiasm. And then I thought, what should I do instead of being an enthusiast? And I think those of us who have experience of socialist politics in one form or the other, we understand that the words enthusiasm can be misused. Much in the same way as the word fanatic was misused by the Nazis, in fact. Because I don't know if you know this fantastic book by Victor Klemperer called Lingua Tertia Imperie, where he tries to trace how words were deliberately misused by the Nazis, and how they deliberately shifted the semantics of certain words, where fanatic went from being a pejorative to being basically an obligatory quality of a good Nazi. You had to be a fanatic. So enthusiasm I don't like, and I was thinking and there's something else I really don't like, and that's urgency. Urgency is something that it's a very managerial term that is being used and misused again and again in cultural organizations to decide what to do. A program needs to be based on urgency. What's urgent? Urgency for me is just putting out fires. It's just doing the things that you have to do on an everyday basis that actually prevent you from doing what you should do. It's just responding to the situation as it occurs, things that happen that you have no control over, and urgency is basically letting someone else set your agenda, as is enthusiasm often. So I was thinking, what can I put instead of this? And then I figured out that interest might be the answer. If an organization is to be more durable and sustainable over time, and in terms of the energy of the people who work for it, then maybe interest is better than enthusiasm, and certainly better than urgency, because it can be subjective and collective at the same time. It allows for different points of view, in my opinion. It allows for different interests, and it allows for people to have a sincere interest in what they do, without being asked to do the urgent thing or being asked to show enthusiasm. And then I started looking at interest in terms of what it might mean and how it might be used. And I realized that the etymology of interest, etymology is very useful and quite dangerous. You remember Heidegger saying that when we think, we should take care not just to use the dictionary, but actually also to think for ourselves. But if you look at what interest means in its Latin form, it comes from interesse, which means something like being between. And this being between, or being amongst, or it's to do with some kind of shared subjectivity, right? So I figured that interest might be defended as a sort of way forward for subjectivity within an institutional framework, because that's how we approach these terms at Mucka, because it allows people who are actually engaged in doing something together, it allows them to think about the together and existence at the same time. it allows them to think about inter and to act as part of a collective organism, and it still makes it possible not to forget about existence. And then adding to that, I was thinking about how we use the term interesting, because it comes, I think, hand in hand. It's used together with another term, namely important. And if you're sort of honestly trying to describe, for instance, what you want to do in a museum, the program you want to create, and the things you believe in them, and therefore you want to show them to other people, which I think is always the best ideology for programming, rather than trying to figure out what other people want from you, which I personally can never do. Then I think you end up using these two words quite honestly. What I want to do, what's interesting and what's important. It doesn't have to be urgent, and you don't have to be enthusiastic about it, but it has to be interesting and important. And somehow important is less subjective than interesting, and I can't actually even tell you why, but it's my intuition that in a scale of subjectivity, importance is slightly less subjective than interesting. Maybe we can discuss this in our groups later. Just as an illustration, a rather poor illustration of this, but I think it's nice to have some kind of illustration. I want to show you something interesting that perhaps is important, that I'm working on right now, because I'm working, as I told you before, I'm working on an exhibition titled The Welfare State. It's not really an exhibition about the welfare state, although it also is. It has 8 artists in it, and it will also have material coming from 4 different archives in Flanders, which of course is part of Belgium. And but everything in Flanders and in the Walloon part of Belgium, and also in the Netherlands, is divided into the so-called pillars of society. The idea in the 19th century was to build a society where different groups would grow as pillars, and they would support, and they would grow independently of each other, and they would support a common roof, and the common roof would be the state. But they would do that in such a way that they would never touch each other. You know, and that's the metaphor of the pillar. And in Belgium, there were basically 3 pillars. There were the Catholics, or the Christian Democrats, the liberals, and the socialists. And these were the basic 3 pillars. And then you can also say there's a 4th pillar, within Belgium at least, not so much in the Netherlands, but within Belgium, because there's also a language divide. You know, there's French speakers and Dutch speakers within Belgium, and the Flemish nationalists are sometimes considered to be the 4th pillar. So there are 4 archives in Flanders that have a wealth of material relating to social policy and recent history, the post-war welfare state. So the illustrative part of the exhibition will be the material that we take from these archives. Now, the liberal archive, keeping this very short, is interesting in that it mostly devoted to issues of education, because that has been the liberal agenda in Belgium, to propose an alternative to religious education. But they also have a sub-collection of some 5,000 or 6,000 photographs from the Belgian Congo. And I thought, I need an image to show the people in the museum and also outside the museum what the welfare state is. So I need to try and find the image of the welfare state. And I think I did. I'm not going to show you that image now, but I think I did because in the late 50s, there was in the Belgian Congo, there was an official propaganda organization called the Information Service of the Belgian Congo. And they employed photographers. And these photographers took pictures of official visits, but also and other public events, but also of the welfare state being implemented in the Belgian Congo in the 50s. And I thought that might be a nice image of the welfare state. This is just some extras that I want to show you, just because I found them interesting. And because we have spoken about colonialism before, and this is, in a certain sense, an illustration of it. I don't know if you see this, but this is the plane of the king, King Baldwin, king of the Belgians, flying into Coquillaville in the Belgian Congo in 1955, and the soldiers in the Belgian garrison have been ordered to stand on the exercise field in this particular formation, which says in French, "Vive le roi B," long live King B. So that's how he expected to be received. This is King Baldwin, 25 years old, in conversation with the Mwami of Rwanda, because Rwanda and Burundi were also ruled by the Belgians. They were taken from the Germans and given to the Belgians as compensation for the invasion of Belgium in the First World War by the Germans in 1918. I find this image, of course, quite nice, with the interior, with the very tall Mwami of Rwanda and the King of Belgium. Now, here comes the point. This was just the introduction. In 1959, and this speaks directly to subjectivization, I think. In 1959, there were riots in Leopoldville against the Belgians because a group of so-called évolués, kind of more or less Western-educated natives, had been taken to Brussels to attend the World's Fair, the World Expo in Brussels in 1958. And that's the first time they ever saw a white person carrying anything. That's the first time they saw how people in Belgium live their lives, how white people oppress each other, in Belgium. And so it was an impulse, and of course it was a very raw impulse that struck a very raw matter, which was social consciousness in the Belgian Congo. And it led to riots, and the prime target of these riots were the schools. So all the schools, almost, I think all the schools in Leopoldville were ransacked and vandalized by the rioters. And they left messages behind. And I managed to find in two different binders in this archive, I managed to find a message left behind saying, "Je suis," I am, in one school. And then when you cross town, you go to another school, you find a message which you really cannot see here, but it says "indépendant." So there's a kind of, this I think also illustrates the idea of a collective subjectivity, Je suis indépendant, I am independent, written on two blackboards in Leopoldville in 1959. I think it's the beginning of a good story. And that's what I wanted to share with you as an illustration. Thank you.
If this exhibition is going to be in Merca Museum, and it's quite powerful to show these images in the context of Belgium. So what is this, any idea also behind
Of course,
that?
because the collective memory of the Belgian Congo is a bit like the memory of the Cultural Revolution in China. Yes, mistakes were made, but on balance, the positive dominates. That's the official collective memory. When it was the property of the king, of Leopold II, atrocities were committed, but then the Belgian state took over in 1908, and they turned it into a model colony, and they did their best, and they did a good job. That's the official self-understanding of this whole very difficult issue in Belgium. And what the images that will be part of the exhibition, it's just a very small part of the exhibition. It's more a commentary than anything else on the welfare state. They will show how the authorities of the Belgian Congo wished to curate the image of a welfare state being implemented for the natives of the Belgian Congo. There were things to photograph, but when you look at the photographs, you see that they're all from the same area of Leopoldville, and they seem to be made in the same building, and sometimes even they feature the same people.
He was saying when you exhibit this kind of material in the museum,
Yes.
you probably have some kind of agenda why you're showing this.
Of course, because the agenda behind the exhibition is debate about the welfare state, and I think our colleague Beatriz Preciado has said that yes, the welfare state is, well, to paraphrase her, right? It's an emancipatory project, but it is also the psychiatric hospital and the heteronormative school, you know? It is both of these things. And it is, you know? And it is in crisis, but it has always been in crisis, you know? It has always been a negotiation, and it has always been a precarious negotiation, and there have always been many opinions about it. The welfare state is not necessarily even the work of social democracy, you know? Like in Europe, the welfare state was put in place before social democracy as a way to prevent social democracy from attaining power. And then by social democracy, it was also used to prevent radical Marxism from developing. So it has been, you know, in a certain sense, a weapon against social change just as much as a weapon for social change. And so there are many contradictory things that can be thought and said and shown about the welfare state, and the exhibition tries to do a little bit of that work. And of course, it's a conscious decision by me as a non-Belgian to include this in the exhibition. To make the public become a witness of something. Well, in a sense, I mean, these pictures of the riots, of the aftermath of the riots, they were taken by the information service, and I don't actually know how they were used because I'm just beginning to look at this. But I think that there are two kinds of pictures, right? One is the many pictures of destruction, and they were probably used for some kind of forensic purposes, you know, to try and, because there are also very interesting pictures, I can show them on my phone if you want, of obscene messages written on the blackboards, where they have been deciphered, you know, and they're, I think, trying to find out who wrote them, you know, basically. And these are just, you know, political and obscene at the same time, which is even perhaps more interesting, you know, to think about in terms of subjectivity and decolonization. But then there are also pictures that show, and they're captioned very explicitly to show how the authorities and the population did their best to return to normalcy just a few days after the riots. And these are rather eerie pictures of half-empty streets with a few 1950s American cars on them, you know, and shops and things like that. So I think there were several agendas behind these pictures. And obviously, also the artworks, and Donna Kukama, for instance, from South Africa, is one of the artists in the exhibition, and she will come to Antwerp and she will make work there. She will spend 3 months in Antwerp. So their work will also, in a certain sense, be this, as you say, you know, exposing the audience to something, making the audience witness something. But of course, there the narrative is controlled by the artist, and not by me as a curator.